They woke the world to their magic, and their wizardry transcends time. Many have passed on, but their heroics live forever. On football's greatest stage, the gods of the game have earned their encore. Pele, Beckenbauer, Cruyff, Maradona. Revered today by generations unborn when they weaved their spell. In the streets of South America, up laneways throughout Europe, on the dirt roads of any African village, the deeds of the past inspire the players of tomorrow. It's the cup of hope, the cup of dreams. It's football's biggest prize on the greatest stage of all. As Stockholm, Sweden prepared to host the 6th World Cup in the middle of 1958, the whole world was going through a time of awakening. USA President Dwight D. Eisenhower was establishing space agency NASA in a bid to expand Earth's horizons. The plastic hula hoop had hit the market. The Beatles were making their first recording under their original name, The Quarrymen. And the football world was waking to the magic of a 17-year-old known as Pele. Fast forward to 1970. Man had walked on the moon, but the USA space program was already being cut back. The hula hoop fad was dead. The Beatles had made their last record. Pele, though, was still going strong. The star of Mexico's World Cup, and the first and still the only man to win 3 World Cups. Pele, full name Edson Arantes de Nascimento, is the greatest figure in football history. At 17, he arrived in the world game like a beautiful burst of light. And he shone all through the sparkling 60s and for a good portion of the 70s. 1,281 goals in a sport where 500 goals makes you a legend. He scored 92 hat-tricks, 4 goals in a game 30 times, 5 goals in a game 6 times, and in one outrageous match in Brazil in 1984, he scored 8 goals. When he retired, he became an ambassador, a kind soul, respectful of the game, its traditions, and its future. Sure, he had an ego, but how could he not? He's as revered by the generations who never saw him play as the old men and women who can recall his genius. And when that genius is recalled, it's the World Cups through which his story is told. And that story coming up after the break, a Jules Rimet masterpiece on football's greatest stage. In June 1958, at the World Cup in Sweden, the world of football was in desperate need of something to smile about. The game was still rocked by the tragedy in February that year, when 8 Manchester United players and 12 others were killed in a plane crash. The youth and verve of Brazil became the representation of hope, and the player who epitomized the beautiful game was Pele. It would be wrong to say that Pele's arrival on the world stage was a surprise to all. He was already a star in Brazil, having made his senior debut at Santos at the age of 15, and at 16, becoming top goal scorer in the league. But in those days, the football grapevine was not quite as sophisticated, and to those outside of Brazil, there was skepticism about the ability of a 17-year-old to play a significant role against the best in the world. They were wrong. Pele's first World Cup was almost over before it began. He injured his knee in a pre-tournament practice match and missed Brazil's first 2 matches. While he was recuperating, coach Vicente Fiola received a report from the team's psychologist who said Pele was too young and not mentally ready for such a big stage. Fiola's response was famous. You might be right, but you know nothing about football. If Pele's knee is ready, he plays. These fascinating pictures from Brazil's training base show how much a part of the team Pele already was. His knee was ready for the final match of the group stage against pre-tournament favourites, the Soviet Union. And while he didn't score, he did give the assist to Vava for the second of his 2 goals in the 2-0 win. In the next 3 matches came the awakening. In the quarter-final against Wales, he scored the only goal. In the semi-final, a treble, goals at 52, 64 and 75 minutes. And in the final, a brace at 55 minutes and the crowning glory in the 90th minute to give Brazil the World Cup 5-2. At 17 years and 249 days, Pele became the youngest player to play, score and win in a World Cup final. He was football's new joy. After the 5th goal, even I wanted to cheer for him, said Swedish midfielder Sigge Parling. Pele's place as the only man to have won 3 World Cups is so revered that it seems churlish to point out that he didn't actually play in 3 World Cup finals. After the events of 1958 and an ever-expanding silverware count back home with Santos, Pele arrived in Chile for the 1962 World Cup as the best player in the world. The opening match against Mexico was business as usual with a goal and an assist. But 25 minutes into the second match against Czechoslovakia, he received a pass from Garrincha, took a powerful long shot which just missed, tore his hamstring and hobbled from the World Cup stage. Garrincha shone in Pele's absence, and the Brazilians completed back-to-back wins. Under FIFA rules, Pele's appearance in the group stage entitled him to his place in the record books as a recipient of the Jules Rimet Trophy. With Garrincha now 32 and not fully fit after a car accident, Brazil's 1966 side was always going to be heavily reliant on Pele. He knew it, and so did the opposition. In those days, there were no substitutes, so if Pele could be hurt, it was a double benefit. And in the opening match, Bulgaria was determined to stop him. 15 minutes into the first game, he goaled with a superb free kick from one of the few infringements punished by the referee. The goal made Pele the first man to score at 3 successive World Cup tournaments. But for the rest of the match, his marker, Dobromir Zečev, was seemingly free to try to cut him down, causing one pressman to observe. Pele won't finish the World Cup. It's amazing he hasn't gone mad. Pele finished the game injured and missed Brazil's second match before his return for the final group game against Portugal. His treatment was even worse. His opponent, Moraes, fouled him so badly he was helped from the field and later declared he would never play in a World Cup again. Football was lucky he changed his mind. As the England team was parading around Wembley after its win in the 1966 World Cup, all Pele could think about was the injustice of the constant harassment and unsporting attention he had encountered over the last 2 tournaments. He headed back to the comfort of Santos, and it would be more than 2 years before he played another match for Brazil. When he was asked to play in the 1969 World Cup qualifying matches for the 1970 tournament in Mexico, he initially declined. But with all the other stars from the 58 and 62 World Cup winning teams retired, like Garrincha, Vava, Zico and Dido, Brazil was desperate for the experience of Pele to complement a fresh group of exciting players. Meanwhile, even bigger things were happening behind the scenes. Pele had not been the only big name to have been targeted with little protection from referees in England. And FIFA determined that the ugly, undisciplined play of 1962 and 1966 should not be repeated. He agreed to return, scoring 6 goals in 6 qualifying matches. In late 1969, against Vasco da Gama, Pele scored one of the more straightforward goals in his club career. A foul, a regulation conversion. But it was his 1000th goal and unleashed the type of wild celebrations that would characterize the final period of his career. 1970 would mark a glorious beginning of a glorious end to his career, and he headed to Mexico for his 4th and final World Cup. FIFA had stuck to their vow that referees would take a harder line and support their most attractive players in Mexico. And that's the way it worked out when Pele made his return and scored in Brazil's 4-1 win over Czechoslovakia in the first match. The 1970 tournament is regarded as one of the most attacking and entertaining of all World Cups. Gerd Muller's 10 goals, 7 from Pele's fellow forward wizard, Jairzinho, and other standout performances from big names like Franz Beckenbauer and Bobby Charlton ensured the first World Cup televised in colour would provide excitement the world over. Brazil swept the tournament, scoring 19 goals. The final was one-sided, Pele opening the scoring 18 minutes in, and although the Italians drew level in the first half, they were completely overrun in the second half. Pele's 4 goals and 5 assists would see him retrospectively named Player of the Tournament. His partnership with Jairzinho, the epitome of the beautiful game. And with the midfield magicians, Gerson and Revellino, and the outstanding defender and captain, Carlos Alberto, Brazil's 1970 lineup became almost universally rated the greatest winning World Cup team ever. His historic 3rd World Cup victory saw the end of Pele the player and the birth of Pele the legend. Pele's role on football's greatest stage reaches its finale after the break. After becoming the first and still the only player to win 3 World Cups, Pele was presented a replica of the Jules Rimet Trophy and was king wherever he went. In July 1971, his international career ended with 2 friendlies against Austria and Yugoslavia, although he played on with Santos until 1974. Then came one of his greatest contributions to the game, retracting his retirement in 1975 to virtually single-handedly popularize soccer in the United States, with 2.5 seasons with the New York Cosmos. Decade upon decade of hero worship followed, but the most relevant accolades remain those of his peers in the years he was in his prime. The French striker, Just Fontaine, scored 13 goals in Pele's first World Cup tournament of 1958. His record still stands, but this is what he said. When I saw Pele play, it made me feel I should hang up my boots. The late 50s with Pele still in his teens was an era when Ferenc Puskás and Alfredo Di Stefano were immortalising Real Madrid in club football. This is what Puskás said. The greatest player in history was Di Stefano. I refuse to classify Pele as a player. He was above that. And the last word to the legend credited with changing the game in the post-Pele era, Johan Cruyff. Pele was the only footballer who surpassed the boundaries of logic. When the gods of the game bow to another, it leaves just one man standing on football's greatest stage, Pele, the king. The unification of West and East Germany, symbolised by the fall of the Berlin Wall, was one of three stories which dominated the 1990 World Cup in Italy, as Franz Beckenbauer's highly fancied team played under the West German flag for the last time at a World Cup. The behaviour of England's football fans was also a topic of great concern for organisers, who at the request of the British government banished England and its rowdy supporters to the island of Sardinia for all of its group matches. But if politics and hooliganism were distracting issues, the third big story was much more traditionally football. Would anyone be able to stop Maradona? Regardless of his erratic off-field behaviour, his performance in the previous World Cup in 1986 had been so single-handedly magnificent that all attention was on the captain of La Albi Celeste. To his credit, Maradona's attitude throughout the tournament was manful. He was fouled 53 times, an average of more than 7 per game, but held his temper. Argentina's campaign, though, would eventually fail because of a toenail. Maradona played the entire tournament with a painful ingrown toenail, and in the second match, he also sprained his ankle, which was swollen and sore thereafter. He still had flashes of brilliance, enough to make the FIFA All-Star team again, but not enough to get past West Germany in the final. England officials must have spent the entire tournament on tranquilizers, and not just because Paul Gascoigne was in the team, and not just because of their unruly fans. Every match was a tense battle, and they came back to win their quarter-final with 2 late penalties before losing their semi-final on a penalty shootout. The defeat to West Germany was characterised by the tears of Paul Gascoigne after he received a yellow card, which will put him over the limit and out of the final if England progressed. In the final, Argentina had just 1 shot on goal to West Germany's 23, and it was decided fittingly with a single goal from a penalty shot at the 85th minute after Roberto Sensini fouled Rudi Völler and Andreas Bremer converted the spot kick. Only 115 goals were kicked for the entire tournament, the average of 2.2 goals, the lowest scoring average of any World Cup tournament. It wasn't pretty, but it delivered the World Cup for Franz Beckenbauer, the first man to win as a player in 1974 and as a manager. And for the soon-to-be reunified nation of Germany, a win's a win on football's greatest stage. There are certain achievements in football which can never be erased. And for Didier Deschamps, the title of France's first World Cup winning captain is a badge of honour to be worn for life. The short, stocky defensive midfielder made his debut for Nantes in 1985 and moved to Marseille in 1989 with a season on loan with Bordeaux. He also played for Juventus in Italy, Chelsea in England, and Valencia in Spain, and would go on to earn 103 caps with his national side. Deschamps started at France during a period when Le Bleu failed to qualify for football's greatest stage in both 1990 and 94. But he was well moulded to the team-first philosophy of Aimé Jacquet, who arrived as manager in 1993 to steer the French in a more fruitful direction. When Jacquet dumped Eric Cantona as captain for the Euro '96 campaign after his suspension over the kung fu kick of a spectator in England, the erratic Cantona criticised the choice of Deschamps as his replacement. He labelled him the water carrier, saying his role was merely to pass the ball to more talented teammates. Deschamps, showing the pragmatic intelligence that would years later see him reunite a fractured French team as coach, replied simply, "Every team needs its water carriers." Ahead of the World Cup in '98, Deschamps had 12 titles to his name, including 3 top-flight trophies in Italy with Juventus and 2 Champions Leagues. But there was one thing missing. And so came the World Cup on home soil in 1998. Into the final, and 2-0 up on Brazil at half-time, thanks to a couple of brilliant Zinedine Zidane headers. The captain delivered a strong message. "We don't let anything go. Not now, huh? Not now," he instructed. In another rehearsal for his post-playing days, it said his teammates hung on every word of his inspired half-time address. The French adding another goal through Emmanuel Petit to salute a 3-0 victory. Deschamps would ride the wave of momentum from the World Cup, leading the golden generation of French football to more glory at the 2000 UEFA European Championship, beating Italy 2-1. And on that winning note, Deschamps called time on his career. The man, whose surname means "of the field," stepped off it for one last time, leaving no doubts he belonged on football's greatest stage. There have been some vicious thumpings on football's greatest stage. Germany's 7-1 semi-final shellacking of Brazil in 2014 springs to mind. But what is the biggest win in the history of the World Cup? The answer, up next. When we also cast an eye over another hero of the 1998 World Cup winning team of France, Fabien Barthez. Welcome back. And the answer to the biggest win in a World Cup tournament is Hungary, which trounced El Salvador 10-1, with the assistance of the only World Cup hat-trick by a substitute, Laszlo Kiss, in 1982. But the answer comes with a sting. Despite the massive loss, El Salvador was still able to celebrate the only goal it had ever scored in 2 World Cup tournaments. And despite the win, Hungary failed to qualify out of its group. When World Cup success is reached, it is usually the dazzling strikers and flashy midfielders who are heralded. Pele, Ronaldo, Zidane, all became champions on football's greatest stage. But in 1998, it was French goalkeeper Fabien Barthez who shone most brightly. Hailing from La Valais in the southwest of France, he played at 4 different clubs in Ligue 1, as well as a stint at Manchester United in the Premier League. Most of his success came with Monaco and the Red Devils, but he did win a Champions League title with Marseille. His aggressive, forward-thinking style was both captivating and frustrating. But on football's greatest stage in 1998, his performance was near flawless. In the final on home soil against defending champions Brazil, Zinedine Zidane earned Player of the Match honours with 2 first-half goals. But it was Barthez who stood tall in goals, repelling the best the world could throw at him. He was a star, conceding just 2 goals all tournament, keeping 5 clean sheets to win the Lev Yashin Award. It was the first time in 20 years a host nation of the World Cup had held aloft the trophy. Barthez followed his clean sheet in the '98 final with another against Brazil in the quarterfinals in 2006. The only time any nation has kept the Brazilians scoreless in 2 consecutive matches at the World Cup. Although Barthez and his French side would go on to lose the 2006 final to Italy in a heartbreaking penalty shootout, he will always be revered by his nation for stepping up when football's greatest stage came to France.